Hi everyone! I'm really excited to speak at this event, despite the fact it's been online and it always feels a bit awkward to speak to your own camera instead of live audience. I'm still very happy to be here, and I want to speak about the topic that actually is taking my mind for the last 2 to 3 months, and this is about how we plan to migrate a really big and old code base to Vue 3 and the things I'm excited about in particular. And before we start speaking about these things, let's try to find how big and old the code base is. So currently in this code base, we have 502 Vue applications. Because our code base is not an SPA, unfortunately, it's a big multi-page application that has many Vue apps mounted here and there. And in total, we have 1,298 Vue files, maybe even more, because here, when I'm speaking, maybe someone else merged one more Vue application or a few Vue components. But it was like this when I was preparing the talk. And in average, we have 230,000 rows of Vue code. And you can imagine this is a really big code base. So migration will be a challenge. And this code is not only big, but the code base is really old. In general, this code base is almost 8 years old. Fortunately, Vue code is not that old. We started Vue for the first time in 2016. So actually, we started playing around it when Vue 2 was in beta and just released. This leads to some interesting consequences. For example, we have state management sometimes that is not Vuex. We have our own state management tools based on JavaScript classes. Of course, right now we have newer applications that use Vuex and even newer applications that ditched Vuex in favor of Apollo client. So this code base is not only old, but it's very dispersed. And this creates certain challenges in migration, right? But also Vue 3 will bring a few features that will make this migration really wishful and pleasant. So now when you are prepared to everything, when you know a bit about our code base, let me introduce myself and introduce this code base in particular. My name is Natalia, and I'm Vue.js core team member. I care mostly about Vue documentation, and a few last months, I was mostly working on Vue 3 docs and migration guide. So I know what to expect from migration. And I work as a staff front-end engineer at GitLab. And I will be speaking about GitLab code base. Yes, it's that old, it's that big, and that dispersed, and it has many dark places where sometimes I'm afraid to dive in, but I will need to, because the migration is soon. The migration is really expected, and I will be one of the people who will lead this migration. So let's dive into things that really excite me in terms of this migration, and let me explain why I'm waiting for it. The first thing is very important for every single JavaScript and non-JavaScript developer as well. And here we're speaking about performance. To explain why performance is really important here, let me show you this short video. So here, and let's make it full screen so it's easier to see. So here, you see the part of the merge request diffs. And a really scary thing, as you can see in Inspector, every single line is a Vue component here. Not only a single line, every single table cell here with a number is also a Vue component. And sometimes we have really huge diffs. And if particular diff is bigger than 500, you can only imagine that how many Vue components we have on a certain page. And of course, the performance here is a tricky part, because if you try, even now, if you try open a merge request with a huge amount of divs and then you try to collapse this div, it will take some time, because most of these components were stateful. Most of these components had Vuex subscription. And when you're collapsing this div, a destroy of all these components needs some time because they're all unsubscribing from all these Vuex dependencies. And this actually affects performance in a really bad way. So we were trying to find some workaround when we are still in Vue 2. And we did find it. It's functional components. First of all, we are trying to decrease the amount of components in general, but you cannot just get rid of everything. So we changed our components to be functional one, to get rid of these dependencies, to remove stateful components, and to just make these small components in divs to render whatever is passed to them. So here you can see a very simplified, very basic functional component with a line number that only renders a div with certain classes, and it has a props passed to them with a line number. And it renders this line. Changing these to functional components already improved the performance a bit, but with Vue 3, things will be even more exciting. In Vue 3, if you never paid attention to what happened with functional components, we will remove the functional true property, the functional property basically from stateful components. And also, we will remove template functional. This means there will be no functional components as a theme, only render functions. And if you ask me who likes to read render function, this is definitely not me. And definitely not the most of GitLab developers. Because stateful components, templates are just easier to digest, right? So what I'm excited about, it's removed. I'm going to write render functions in Vue 3, right? Nope. Because performance gains from 2.x for functional components are now negligible in 3.x. We recommend just using stateful components here. I will just give it a pause so you realize that now we don't need to convert every single component we use in merge requests to functional. And we will gain a performance boost for free just for pumping the merge version of Vue, even in the places where we never thought about performance, but we have struggled with this, even unconsciously. It will just improve our overall performance immediately. I cannot even express how happy I am about this change, because performance is always a goal for a big application, and here we will get it immediately. Now let's go to code abstraction point, and let me speak about mixins, because our code base is dark and full of mixins, and sometimes we do really weird things with them. Let's take a look at this code snippet. As you can see, there is all designs mixin, and then inside this mixin, there is a different mixin. So it's mixin inside of the mixin, and both mixins can be imported to the component together or independently. And I can't even complain about this. I would like to show Git blame here, but it would blame me because it was me partly who authored this mixin. And this way, we were trying to create a level of abstraction to reuse the code in the components. What is wrong with mixin, if you ask me? So I've been working a lot with them, and here are a few cons. Because mixins are not really reusable. I mean, these two mixins, sometimes when I use them, contain properties that I don't need. But instead of just adding more props to my component, and okay, I will use a mixin. Maybe two properties of 7 are not that usable here. Anyway, I get 5 of them, and that's what I need. Mixins are conflict prone. When you use mixin, you need to keep in memory every single name for every single property you're going to use, because if apparently you use the same name inside the component, you're screwed, because it will override the property from mixin, and you, without knowing it, will get errors, and these errors are really hard to track because you have no idea that you have conflicting names in mixin and component. And my favorite moment, unclear source. Trust me, it's so hard when you work on the code base with like 5 different mixins, few of them unnested mixins, and you try to find out, like, I have this property in Vue.js, where it does come from. I have no idea. I need to dig all the mixins to find this property and to fix it there. And sometimes it just takes too much time to play around this. And honestly, I would probably find a better use of my time than trying to find a method in the deep nest mixin. So how do we want to fix this in the code base? Let's take a look at this mixin. This is real mixin from GitLab's code base. Honestly, I don't even know why we needed a mixin here, but it is what it is. This is what we have. It basically imports the different methods from utility helper and adds them as methods to the component. It's basically time formatted and tooltip title. And what could we use instead in Vue 3? And of course, I cannot resist to pitch the best feature of Vue 3 right now, and I believe it will be pitched at the whole conference multiple times, but anyway, how we plan to use it in our code base. So here is composition API, and here is how we can rewrite this mixin to create a composable. Again, we just adding the methods to the component, and it's not that hard to do with the composition API. You can see it's even shorter than mixin. But what I will get instead, I will have clear import. So when I look for format date and get time ago, I will see it's imported from this particular composable, from use time ago function. I can simply check them there and refactor if I want. I can make it more or less flexible instead of mixing. And importing them there is just in the setup function, and returning them from the setup function is very clear and explicit. And this explicitness is what I really like in the composition API. And that's one of the reasons I want to start refactoring our code-based composition API as soon as we have a green flag for migration. And as a more deep example about how do I plan to use composition API at GitLab is an example combined with Apollo code. Because at GitLab, in particular, I'm responsible for front-end GraphQL and Apollo usage, and I maintain a few applications that are using Apollo. And let's take a look into this chaos to see how Vue 3 and VueApollo-4 are going to fix this chaos in my application. In our code base, when we use VueApollo, we tried different approaches. First of all, we are using VueApollo-Options API, which means we are leveraging an Apollo component option with all its properties. And as an experiment, we decided to go with Apollo mutations as Apollo component. If you never worked with VueApollo, this is a renderless component with a scope slot. It exposes a few methods and properties for you to use. And of course, we needed to reuse different Apollo queries in different components. So I went with mixins. You actually have seen this mixing in the previous part of my talk. Because I needed to query designs, and designs are just the list of images in different places of my application, so I went with the mixing. And all these options can be simplified if we are going to use composables. And thanks to Guillaume Cho, you probably know him as Acronym, VueApollo version 4 leverages the composition API without deprecating options and components. So we can start using it with the syntax we already have, with a mess we already created, and it's fine. But eventually we will be able to migrate to VueApollo composables, just importing what we need from VueApollo composable package. Let me give you a few examples on how it's going to look in our code base. So currently we have this component property, which is an Apollo query for user permissions, nothing more. And I have a few variables like full path and issue ID, and I want to get user permissions for a certain issue. Looks clean enough, like whatever, this is fine. Let's take a look how I am going to change it using VueApollo composables, composition API. Here I will be importing two methods from Apollo composable, and I get a few properties like result and loading with use query, and extract a result using useResult method here. And after this, the only thing I would need to do is return permissions and loading from this composable. I can use this in the setup component property if I want to. I can abstract this as a view composable, let's say view use permissions, right? And return it from there. So I will be able to use this composable whenever I want it, instead of Mixins I had. And this is still very clean and more readable than object from the options API. At least this is my personal opinion, and I really want to start using this one. So this is how we refactor options API one. What about VueApollo components? So I already mentioned that we use Apollo mutation component, and you can see that this is renderless component with a default slot, and we pass lots of props here, like mutation name, variables, whatever we want on update. So how do we want to update an Apollo cache here? And we have mutate method expose, loading, and error. I like it honestly more than options API because I can clearly see loading, error, and mutate methods. But as anything in this world, renderless components have their own cons. And in this case, the cons is I only can use these methods here. I can only call them from this part of the template, and sometimes I need them outside. Sometimes I need loading state outside of Apollo mutation. And also when we use queries in options API mutations in the components syntax, it creates chaos, as I already mentioned. So how would this mutation look if we go with the composition API? Much simpler. As you can see, we are importing use mutation hook, and we pass the same syntax we had passing to the component. And I will have this delete design alias method, and I can call it whenever I want in my template, be it inside, outside, somewhere in the completely different place where Apollo mutation was placed. And again, I can abstract it to the composable if I want to have it in multiple places. So this will create a level of abstraction that is explicit, easy readable, understandable, and will unify our Apollo code base to have the same syntax for everything. And again, this feels like a magic to me, so I'm really looking forward for migrating to Vue 3 and VueApollo 4. Next thing I'm really excited about will improve our component library, because on top of everything, on top of 8 years old code base with like half of the 1,000 of Vue applications, we also have a component library that is called GitLab UI. And it contains multiple components to reuse in all our applications. And some of these components are really complex. As you can see, this is called GitLab table. And there is like many things happening there, but there is one thing I dislike in particular. This is about two props that go with .sync modifier, which means we want to have vModel, but we are not able to operate multiple vModels in Vue 2. That's why we are creating this thing. And then we, inside of the GitLab table, we work with the sync properties and the updates. And it's a bit of a mess, honestly, because again, this is not very explicit. So instead of this, in Vue 3, we're going to have just multiple vModels on this component. As you can see, we will have sort desk, sort by, and we can add even more. And it will be really easy because the name of the prop and the event are really nicely defined here. The name of the prop will be sort desk and sort by. The name of the update event will be update sort desk and update sort by. And it's very clear for us and why it's better for me than just sync, because I can clearly see what properties are going to be two-way bound to this component. While sync is very simple to skip. And it already created a few issues around this property when we were working with GitLab UI. So multiple vModel is really a thing I'm looking forward to. TypeScript. Honestly, static type checking in GitLab was a huge discussion. As you can see, it was opened 2 years ago by Jacob Schatz. Jacob is not even working for GitLab now. But the discussion was open for, I think, a year and a half. And we had around 300 comments on this topic, very controversial ones. Pros of TypeScript, cons of TypeScript, lots of things. And we ended up with a decision I support, honestly, that TypeScript is cool. Static type checking is really important for such a big code base and a big team. But there is a problem. And this problem is you need too much effort to add types to GitLab's code base. And it's not worthy the profits you can have from TypeScript for now. And I thought that discussion is closed forever, but apparently it's not. Because with Vue 3, using TypeScript feels like a magic. Trust me, and let me reveal one of the secrets. When I was writing a short chapter in our documentation dedicated to TypeScript, I overcomplicated it because I was trying to go a way we had in Vue 2 without diving deep into how Vue 3 works with TypeScript. And I can say I was scolded, but I was notified that it's not that complex, Natalia. And when I started understanding how it works, it was pure magic. Let me share it quickly if you never checked TypeScript documentation for Vue 3. So, what you want to do there is import define component method from Vue. And when you define your components, you need to wrap them with define component, and that's it. It enables type inference. And in 90% of cases, you won't need to declare types explicitly because Vue is smart enough to understand that when you define a data property, which is 0, it's a number. You don't need to write as number. You don't need to explicitly declare a type here. Because if you try to use a string method on the number, you will immediately get this warning. Of course, in some cases, you still want to declare types, especially when we're speaking about props. But most of the cases are just easy as this. You write a JavaScript code. But this JavaScript code has a type inference immediately. And this is what I call a magic. And this is what probably will reopen the discussion about using TypeScript for GitLab. Because this is effortless. Write define component, get type inference, and be happy. And with this so less effort on TypeScript, we can revise our opinion on types in general. And this is another thing I'm extremely grateful to have in Vue 3. And last but not least, I think that will be probably shown by Guillaume. So this is just a sneak peek. DevTools. As I mentioned, we have 502 Vue applications, and for now, it's total mess if you try to work with DevTools. Because yes, they're all listed in DevTools, but if you want to inspect Vuex, you only get views for one of the applications. This is not the case anymore with the DevTools next generation, and you can simply have a drop-down to select the application you want. And this is amazing. But I believe we will have more on DevTools soon. I hope you did like my insights on the things I'm excited about for migration. And thank you.